The moon, you see these large craters that are filled with very low viscosity lavas. The vent gets completely buried. If the viscosity of the lava is low enough, it rises along fractures, quite commonly fractures that were created by the impact in the first place, and then it comes to the surface and it just smooths out and forms a nice flat puddle, and it buries the vent completely.
Blue shirt.
Along the lines of what Mr. Butler was talking about a few moments ago about the still images of Arnold Schwarzenegger over a long period of time, do you have time-lapse photography, just a still image every day of the rover mission that can be strung together to give the appearance of a continuous stride? And was that considered for incorporation into the movie?
I can answer the first part of it, in that there are some images, particularly with those hazard avoidance cameras, the ones that are down low. Every time we do a drive, we take a set of those. And in fact, movies of that have been created, and they're kind of fun to watch. They're very herky-jerky. But I remember one that was, I think, when was it done? It was like, I think it was after we'd been on Mars like 1,000 sols. I think it was to celebrate 1,000 sols. Somebody took 1,000 sols worth of those things and strung them together, and you were kind of like this by the end of it. But it was cool to watch, and you could watch the whole mission unfold in about 2 minutes. I think as far as considering it to go in the IMAX film, you'd have to ask George.
It's a wonderful idea.
Next film.
To the right, you, sir. Right there.
As you mentioned earlier on, as a movie director, would you to project the societies also project to a movie, find an interesting movie on the life of Dr. Robert Zubin and the struggle?
The answer to your question is that I've made a very good movie in the life of Steve Squires, and I'm ready to move on. You, sir.
My question is for both of you. There was a 7-month gap between launch and landing on Mars. What exactly did you guys do?
George, start, and then I'll tell you mine.
I worked in another movie. About John Kerry, and I'll tell you just a little bit about it. I met John in 1964, and he's one of my closest friends. And I made a movie called Going Up River, The Long War of John Kerry. The first half of the movie was about his combat in Vietnam on the rivers and the swift boats. And it would have blown away the people from Texas who brought him down in the middle of his campaign if he had shown the film. Because I interviewed everyone who was on John's swift boats, and they all said the same thing about the conditions under which he won his medals, which was a major objection to the swift boat people from Texas. And he literally could have won the election if that film had been shown around the country. You just don't get all the breaks when you need them every time.
I spent that 7 months with my team earning our Martian driver's licenses. When we launched those rovers, we didn't have a clue how to operate them. Just not a clue. In fact, I got to tell you, a substantial fraction of the software for driving these things had not even been written and tested when we launched them. We launched them with the software for launch, cruise, and landing on board the spacecraft. But 5 months after we launched it, the nice thing about software is you can launch the rocket and then you can launch the software later, and it travels at the speed of light and it catches up with the spacecraft. So we actually didn't get the driving software on board the vehicle until 2 months before landing. We were very, very busy for those 7 months.
Madam.
What's your plan or prediction, realistic prediction for return and the manned mission?
For a sample return and a manned. Wow. What is my predicted date for a sample return and a manned mission? Sample return has been 20 years in the future for the last 20 years, so. But I don't want to say 20 years. I honestly don't know. It's not a scientific question. It is not a technical question. It's a political question. In the political landscape, changes with a time scale that is short compared to how long it takes to do a project like this. So, when the community rises up and says we want to see this happen, when the nation comes together and says we want to see this happen, then it will. We know from history that you can go from a speech to footprints in 6 years in the case of the moon. It shouldn't take us 50 years to get to Mars. How long it's really going to take, I'm not even going to try to predict.
The red shirt.
I wanted to know if there was a way to keep the dust off panels, and if you use atomic energy power, would you then not need panels?
Okay, good questions. Yeah, the question of how to keep dust off the solar arrays is one that we looked at very extensively as we began designing the rovers. We looked at many possibilities. We looked at windshield wipers. We looked at compressed gas jets that would blow stuff off of it. Somebody even suggested electrostatic levitation. My personal favorite was like clear plastic, like saran wrap on rollers. And then when it gets dirty, you turn the rollers and clean plastic comes across. It's not a bad idea, actually. The problem with every one of those is that they require some heavy, complicated mechanical gadget to do the job. Okay, that windshield wiper would have been bigger than my instrument arm and all the instruments on it. And we were right up against the stops for how much mass we could send. So what we chose to do instead was the simple brute force approach of making the solar arrays bigger than they needed to be. We made the arrays as big as we could possibly make them. When those arrays are totally clean, we have to shut the rover down for an hour and a half or 2 hours every afternoon to let it cool off to keep it from overheating. They put out so much power. And so that simple brute force approach turned out to be one that worked pretty well. If you send a nuclear power source, does that mean that you don't need solar arrays? The answer is it depends. Depends on how powerful your nuclear power source is, depends on how much energy your rover uses, depends on the environmental conditions in which you land, and many other things. They are currently, actually right now, looking at adding supplementary solar arrays to the MSL rover as a way of boosting the power on that vehicle. Looking at it. That hasn't been done yet.
The wonderful thing about standing here and looking at your faces is the intensity of interest is so strong here. I really believe that the space program is what America does best. It's a wonderful act of collaboration. And I watched Steve go through it very intensely with a lot of his associates. And this is a magical story that we're dealing with. I feel very strongly about that. So I hope I can get my science lab film financed and underway soon. Next question, in the orange shirt.
I just wanted to see, I know you probably don't want to make a prediction, but how long do you think the rovers will last?
How long will the rovers last? When is this going to end? My wife keeps asking me that question. I have no idea. The only way that you predict, in any realistic sense, the lifetime of spaceflight hardware is by doing life testing of components. You take critical components and you test them to failure. Now, we had a design requirement of 90 sols, 90 Martian days on the surface. So being conservative scientists and engineers, we tested all of our mechanical parts to 4 times that. We tested our electronic parts to 3 times that, 270 sols. We thought that was a pretty big number at the time. Well, today is sol 19, I don't know, does anybody know? Spirit? I think it's 1990 something today. Anyway, what? 1982, see? I've been traveling. We are doing life testing of components on the surface of Mars now. And they're going to die when they die, and it could be tomorrow. It could be 5 years from now. We have no way of knowing. We push them as hard as we can, and we treat every day as a gift. That's all we can do.
Sir, you.
Oh, this is a simple question. You mentioned your wife was complaining about your involvement with this. Does it mean you live on Sol time? And if so, what time is it really in your world?
We are fortunately not living on Mars time anymore. We lived on Mars time for about 4 months. The Martian day, as I'm sure most of you know, is 24 hours and 39 minutes long.